Zoom has started alerting everybody when recording begins, and I think it's like a little bit obnoxious, to be honest, but it is what it is. While everybody is joining us, actually, no, don't want to do that yet. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce some of the Spark Prep staff who are joining us. Thanks, Zoe. That's true. My name is Luke Taylor. I'll do another round of introductions, but if you want to take a second and grab something to make notes with, maybe a pen and maybe a pad of paper, or if you have a phone or an iPad or a tablet of some kind. We're going to be covering quite a bit of material today. We did this workshop last week online for folks in Hanoi, and got a lot of material to go over. So you might want to take some notes. If at any time you have any questions, you can either write them down or you can pop them right in the chat. And either Ming Chang or Zoe or Mai or Tiwang will be happy to answer them for you. We have a number of Spark Prep staff who are joining us for the webinar today, so have plenty of resources if people have questions. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so you can feel free to keep your questions for then if you like. Okay, so I think, let's see, we have 16 people who have voted. That's phenomenal. Thank you. Thanks everybody for doing that. So we have, yeah, again, 50-50 split in grade 10, grade 11. A few people who look like they're in a gap year, a few people who are at the beginning of high school. Great. So we have a few polls that we'll be asking throughout the course of the webinar, and I'm basically going to use this to make sure I try and focus what we're talking about today in areas that are useful for you, hopefully. Obviously, the focus of the webinar today is going to be college application writing, essay writing in particular. And so we'll be really focusing on that, but there will be, you know, some transferable knowledge and skills related to kind of any bit of writing. So if you're, you know, struggling with writing or working with writing anywhere in your own personal life, hopefully these things will be applicable to you. Great. People are still trickling in, which is wonderful. We'll wait another few minutes for everybody to join us. If you've just joined us, I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, you might want to grab something to write with. When we did this workshop last weekend, I spoke for about 90 minutes. I will try and maybe not do quite as much lecturing this time, and then had a question and answer session at the end. So we'll be here for a little while. We have quite a bit of content to cover. So it might be useful to have something to write with or take notes with, or jot down some questions for the end of the session. Might also be a good idea to grab something to drink some water with. I'm gonna go ahead and stay hydrated. Grab a little snack if you're hungry. It's, you know, afternoon. Sometimes the blood sugar begins to drop around late afternoon. We get a little peckish. We need a little glucose boost. So if you want to grab a snack, we'll get started in a few minutes once it looks like people have stopped trickling in. We have had a few more people join us. Thanks everybody for filling out the poll. Man, poll super useful, helpful. I'm glad we have this. So yeah, most people are in grade 10 or 11, so we'll do our best to kind of target material here. I'm going to assume that that's people who have just finished grade 11 or are, I guess now we're kind of in between, so people maybe reconceptualizing of themselves as now grade 11 if they've just finished grade 10. So in any case, I think this will be useful material for everybody to have exposure to. Let's see, we're gonna have a very nice showing today. We have 37 people who've showed up at the moment. Should have like a couple more who might be joining us. Again, if you've just joined us, I'll introduce the other Spark Prep staff who are on the call today. Ming Chang, Zoe, Qing Mai, and Tu Wang will be in the chat, answering any questions should you have them. There will be a question and answer session at the end. So if you do have questions and you feel like it would be useful for everybody to hear about the question that you're asking, feel free to save them. We'll have kind of ample time for question and answer at the end. But if it is something that you just want clarification on, you can pop it in the chat, and you can either direct it to all panelists or to everyone, and we'll go ahead and answer that question for you. All right. Still people trickling in. Thanks for joining us. I was watching a TikTok the other day and someone was kind of like making fun of people who like live stream a lot and do this kind of like monologuing while people are joining, you know, like giving people shout outs to other people who are in the chat, be like, oh yeah, what's up? Hey, thanks for joining us. I feel a little bit self-conscious that I'm monologuing as people are entering. We have another couple minutes or so, and then I think we'll get started. So again, last time probably I'll mention it. If you want to grab a piece of paper or pencil or something to write down or keep notes with, that might be useful. I think we have quite a bit of material to cover today. Snacks, water, encouraged, all of that is useful. I'm going to go ahead and close the chat on my end and the polling on my end, and Ming Chang and Zoe and Mai will go ahead and monitor that. So again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and throw those things in the chat at any time, or you can hold on to them for the end of the session when we will have a question and answer at the very end. All right, let's jump into things, shall we? Yeah, I think we're ready to rock and roll. People will maybe continue to join us, but yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So first thing I want to say is just thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks also for being kind of adaptable with moving this webinar online. I know that the majority of you probably are here down in Ho Chi Minh City or in the South, and I hope all of you are staying safe and spending time with your loved ones and able to maybe relax and catch up on things during this kind of extended social distancing period. I know that this has disrupted a lot of plans for a lot of people, and there's also just a lot of suffering in different areas of the country. And so I just want to acknowledge that this is a difficult time, particularly after a difficult year, and the kind of the resilience and the adaptability and the focus that both our students and the extended community have shown has been really inspiring. So I'm really happy that you could all join us today, and I hope this finds you all well. So today we're going to be chatting about excellence in college application essays. And this is a word that is at the core of Spark Prep's values, kind of on our mission statement. We talk a lot about excellence, the very different and myriad and individual ways that excellence is exhibited or practiced in various different ways in our life. So today we're just going to be looking at it primarily in the college application essay format. And I'm going to try and give you as many detailed frameworks as I can to help you really understand what are the different tools and practices that you can draw on to build excellence. Excellence is the thing that we practice, that we cultivate over time. And so the essays that we'll be looking at today are the result of that practice. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens immediately. There's not really a shortcut really to excellence, but there is an analysis. There is a way that we can understand the way that excellence manifests in the world. And hopefully if you understand the very different ways that excellence can show up in writing, that maybe you'll be able to cultivate that intentionally in your own writing practice. So today we are going to be looking at a few different pieces. First, I want to just give you a brief overview of what the application essays are for. What role do they play in your college application? Why do we have them? How do you think about them? Because I think sometimes it's easy to just be like, oh, essays is just some writing. So I'm just going to do some writing and it'll be a part of my application. But I think if you kind of understand how admissions officers think about essays, what they're kind of looking for, and what impact they can have on your application, then you can design them a little bit more intentionally. Then we'll look at some kind of definitions for excellence using a very specific rubric and framework that Spark Prep uses to analyze writing. So this is by no means the only definition of excellence. You will have your own, and that's wonderful. And I think it is still useful to have a touchstone for what kind of maybe a rigorous examination of excellence might look like. We're going to then look at excellence in a very specific case study example, actually 2 examples. We'll analyze them together. I'll ask you to do a little bit of analysis, so brace yourself. We are going to have a little participation moment later on in the webinar, so I hope you'll indulge us and share a little bit of what you're observing in some of the essays that we're seeing. Then, we'll do a little bit of kind of a quick and dirty top 5 essay writing mistakes. This is really based on what we have observed over the last, almost 10 years of working with students in essay writing. I think I have tried to find a top 5 essay writing mistakes that I think are a little bit maybe unusual or uncommon. So I think maybe these are things that you won't necessarily see kind of in the blog posts or in some articles. Hopefully they'll be unique observations. Then of course we'll look at how to avoid these errors. And then finally, we'll look at kind of tools and the context for writing. And we'll really look at what are the very specific techniques that you can draw on as you're developing your writing practice and cultivating your writing skills. Then we'll have a question and answer session at the very end. So first thing is first, fundamentally, what are essays for? So the very first thing that we want to think about when we talk about essays is that they very simply are just a way to engage the reader, really hold their attention in a deep and abiding way for the time it takes them to read your essay. The personal statement for the common application that most of you are going to write is only 650 words. And I say only because a reader actually will spend around 2 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes more, reading your essay. It's actually a very quick experience, and you want them to be focused the entire time. You want them to kind of hang on your word, be really engaged, find it interesting, find specific. So that is kind of the simplest way of understanding what essays are for. It's a way to engage the reader, because if they're engaged, it means they're paying attention to you. It means they're learning something from you. It means that they care, they're interested. And it also means that they're buying in a little bit to your application. They care about who you are specifically. So the key words here are specific and obviously be interesting. A little bit more complexly, more importantly, essays serve the purpose of adding individual context for your life. And by that, I mean, they add details about you that your grades and transcript and letters of recommendation and your extracurriculars can't by themselves. And so you think about the essays a little bit and saying, like, what's missing from my application that reflect on me as an individual, that if I don't take an opportunity to say it, an admissions officer will miss something fundamentally about who I am, the way that I see the world, the way that I engage with the world, the way that I spend my time. So context is really important because it differentiates one student from another, right? There are many students who are going to have great grades, really interesting activities, strong SATs or other things, but there's only one you, right? And I know that's maybe a little bit cliche, but when we talk about only you, what we're really meaning is the individual context for your life. And that has to do with like an incredible level of specificity in the way that we reflect on our own experience. The third thing, really vitally, right, the purpose that essays serve is to help admissions officers imagine what it would be like to have you on campus. Because remember that in a college experience isn't just about you in isolation by yourself individually. It's very much a community experience. You're living with people, you're studying with people, you're doing activities with people, you're researching, you're developing relationships with professors and faculty and administrators. And so something about the way that you write helps admissions officers really imagine, this is what it will be like to have this student on campus. Maybe they will make this particular contribution. Maybe they will take advantage of our resources in this very unique or specific way. It helps them, again, understand why it should be you that they admit. And again, all of that has to do with specificity and individuality. And you'll hear me repeat these words of individuality and specificity because there are only a finite number of topics. And topics are not the way that you're going to differentiate yourself. It's going to be the individual expression of your essay, the way that you write, the way that you execute, the things that you choose to focus on that will make it really individual. The final thing is we're looking to see how deeply you know yourself, right? At this point in your life, as a young adult, as an academic, as a scholar, as a community member, how do you understand yourself in the context of your community, in the context of the world and society and academics? There is this fundamental need to know yourself to some relatively deep degree, because the deeper you know yourself, the easier it is to make decisions at university, at college, that serve your ultimate goals, right? And now, of course, everybody is on a different journey in the spectrum of self-knowledge, but this is one of the things that admissions officers are looking to understand. How well do you know yourself? How deeply, what kind of questions, how much have you really challenged your own growth? So those are some of the ways you can think about what essays are for, what role they play in your application. Now I want to talk a little bit about what it means to write excellently, not just to write an essay that kind of like, checks the boxes of, 650 words and like, great, and now I have an essay, but what does it mean to have an excellent essay? And when Spark Prep thinks about excellence, we want to break it down into a few particular categories in order to understand the different ways that excellence can be exhibited. So the first thing, in some ways, like the most obvious thing, is your content, what you're writing about. This is your ideas, your themes, your concepts, your experiences, your insights that are specific to you, not ideas and themes in an abstract way, but related to you. So the content answers the question, what am I writing about? And what we're kind of looking for when we're assessing excellent content is deep. Are your ideas deep? Are they sophisticated? Are they nuanced? Are they interesting, right? Not just, look, I have an idea and like, isn't it cute that I had an idea, but like, have I grappled with it? Have I untangled that idea a little bit? Have I really challenged it and turned it upside down and looked at it from different angles, right? Have I brought rigor to my thinking process? So your content is an exhibit of how rigorously you think. The final thing about context or about content is we want to know how authentic it is to you. Does it feel contrived? Does it feel forced? Or does it feel really genuine? Is it really the result of you spending time introspecting, working, putting some effort into your life, and then reflecting on that in a way that we can access? So fundamentally, those are some of the things that we're looking at when it comes to excellent content, not just kind of any content. The next thing that we want to look at is organization. And organization really is how your content is organized, is structured from beginning, middle to end, from the first sentence to the second sentence, the first paragraph to the second paragraph, all the way to the end. Now, organization, in my experience, is one of the things that young writers have had the least experience working on. And it really is one of the most profound areas for creativity and for individuality. The way that you choose to introduce your ideas and then develop them over time is an artistic process, is a creative process. And so I really want students to be really thinking about how are they delivering information, content, and ideas in an accessible way, and importantly, in an efficient way, because again, you only have 650 words. So if you only have 650 words, are you using each word intentionally, purposefully? And again, this is one of the things my students often need to spend the most time working on, because understanding the purpose of each paragraph is not necessarily an intuitive way of thinking, but it is an important aspect of revision to make sure that your essay is tight, that no word is wasted. The next thing that we look at when we're looking at excellence in writing is language, right? Not just can you speak English, but do you have mastery in your fluency? Are you able to use language to support clarity in your writing in a beautiful way, in an incisive way, in a deliberate way? Or is your use of language a little bit kind of, clunky and not quite precise and maybe like a little bit lazy sometimes? Or are you just kind of like getting by using words, or are you using them masterfully? And this is a little bit of the difference between someone who can speak a language and functionally use a language and someone who can express themselves very deeply or in a nuanced way with language. And again, this takes some time. The next thing we talk about is conventions. Conventions is the use of language in the context of grammar or in the context of phrasing. Are you not just kind of, again, checking the boxes with grammar, but do you know how to use both long sentences and short sentences? Do you know how to use punctuation thoughtfully and mindfully? Do you know how to use line breaks and the different ways that we can think of presenting language? You can think of conventions as the presentation of language in a way that helps the reader access your content. And really, everything about writing, your organization, your language, and your conventions help readers access your content, if you can think about it that way. The final thing is your values. Do we sense who you are and what you care about through your writing process? Do we get to know you? Do we get a sense of your individual self? And this is vital, right? We can't read an interesting essay that has nothing to do with you, that is just like an abstract discussion about math or economics or computer science, if you are not involved, because then it's just like a clever essay. And that might be nice. It might be nice to read, but it doesn't help us understand necessarily why we should let you into the college. So these are some ways that we define excellence. Again, we spent quite a bit of time. We actually have a more complex rubric when we're evaluating essays kind of internally. But I think it's useful to think about, when you're evaluating your essays or reading your essays, is my content excellent? Is my organization excellent? Is my language excellent? And if you can evaluate it and analyze it from each of these component positions, then you can know that you actually have really good writing. It's not just a guess like, oh, I like it or I don't like it. We're trying to move way beyond I like it or I don't like it, because it's not a very sophisticated analytical framework. So I'm curious to know, and maybe you guys can put in the chat, and Zoe and Ming Cheng and Mai and Tuang can help me keep track. What are the areas of writing that you who are on the call, what are you struggling with? What are some areas of the writing process that are most difficult for you? Is it content development? Is it organizing your material efficiently over time? Is it vocabulary and using language? So I'd be interested to know, maybe you can take a second and write things down in the chat. What are areas that you're looking to improve on in your own writing? And as you do that, here we're going to begin to look at a couple of case studies. So as I read, what I would like each of you to do is follow along with me and see if you can think about what makes this essay excellent in terms of content, in terms of organization and language. And we're going to do an analysis after I'm done reading it. And hopefully you will understand a little bit what I mean by assessing excellence within the specific context of this essay. And remember, we looked at the very, very beginning, what is the purpose of this essay? It's really to help us understand who this student is, what contribution they might make to our campus, and how deeply they know themselves. And the excellence in this essay will really help us determine those things. So let's go ahead and read. I will do my best to read slowly, and you'll go ahead and you can read with us. And then at the end, I'll ask you to kind of help me do some analysis. So this student was admitted to Harvard a few years ago, and the essay reads like this. My mother took me to our local pagoda twice per week when I was a small child, and I quickly felt a special affinity for the incense-laden air and the calming sound of the gong. As I grew, Buddhism to me changed from the image of the solemn statues and yellow-robed monks of the temple to a way of life. Its principles and philosophies directed me to embark on the journey of self-transformation, the very first step being self-observation. Seeking deeper instruction in the practice, I attended Tao Pagoda in Hengyan province during the summer after my 9th grade. Here, female monks learn and practice Buddhism together and offer instruction to younger students. I studied the tenets of Buddhism through lectures taught by senior monks and meditated 3 times a day with the rest of the community. Each morning at 4 a.m., I pinched myself to stay awake and resisted the urge to arch my stiff back. I cleared my mind, keeping my attention fixed on the single phenomenon of my breath as the monks had taught. I observed my inhalation and exhalation, allowing the physical discomforts to be as they are without attachment. In this way, I learned to calm my mind, so it was no longer overpowered by negative or distracting thoughts. Just like physical exercises make our body stronger, meditation is the mental exercise that gives the mind tranquility and clarity. Had it not been for this experience, high school might have broken me down. An unsettling series of events began during my sophomore year, and meditation increasingly became the tool that kept me centered. My father had chronic lower back problems after years of logging as a child. Then, during a business trip to the mountainous area in Taiwan, he fell and herniated one of his spinal discs. The first time I saw him after surgery, he was lying in a hospital bed with wires protruding from different parts of his body. There was a 50-50 chance he would recover fully or live the rest of his life with severely limited mobility. For 2 months, he was bedridden and in near constant pain, incapable of even the most rudimentary functions, and I quickly became his caretaker, making him food, helping him wash and get dressed, and monitoring his pain levels while his body slowly repaired itself. Then, nearly immediately, my grandmother was diagnosed with severe depression, and care for her needs again fell to me without any warning. But such is life, that we must adapt to changing circumstance. Despite my devotion to Buddhism, its teachings, and the practice of meditation, I still found it difficult to watch my loved ones suffer. The Buddha teaches that life is suffering, but we are also told that suffering arises from attachment. By practicing being present with my father and my grandmother and not trying to control or fix their suffering, I in turn was able to experience moments of peace and reprieve amidst the tumult of our lives. As the famous Zen saying suggests, when I eat, I eat. When I sleep, I sleep. Whatever I do, I try to do it with mindfulness and presence. This dedication helps keep any worries that might arise about the uncertainty of the future or the immediacy of suffering in perspective. In the moments when I fully tended to my father, noticing how he winced at every movement, or tended to my grandmother as she sat for hours before the television, I forgot about my own self. I used to think there would be a magical moment of epiphany when the mighty concept of no self was achieved. But in fact, it exists right in the simplest moments. When we are present and serving others with the full capacity of our being, the self disappears, even if just briefly. And in that moment of freedom, suffering ends. So I'd like you to take a second and let us know, what did you think? How was this for you? Remember, we're using an analytical framework that uses content, the ideas, the themes, the topics, the insights. And we're also understanding organization. What are the different, how did the student lay out this information over time? How did they use language, vocabulary, images, phrasing to support their points or their insights? So maybe you can put in the chat, is there anything that you noticed about this essay that really spoke to you about excellence? Anybody have anything that they want to offer in the chat? You can continue to think about it, and I'll give you a little bit of analysis that we kind of think helps understand this essay. So we're going to start with content. So the topic, you might say that the topic is Buddhism's influence on me, if we're using the most kind of simplified form of the topic. But really, the topic is kind of the container, the vehicle to talk about other things, to talk about what? Specifically, her relationship to Buddhism, meditation practice, how that helped her with family illness, her specific relationship to the pagodas, to the cultivation of service and perspective. She's also helping give us some themes that can carry us throughout the essay, right? Mindfulness. She talks about mindfulness a lot. She talks about presence a lot. She talks about service. And so these are ways that she can kind of tie her idea development throughout the paragraph, from paragraph 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can think about content as kind of the ingredients that go into your essay. And I kind of like this metaphor a little bit. With any recipe, right? If we're cooking lasagna or pho or any kind of dish, the result really is based on the quality and the freshness of the ingredients that you're using, as well as your specific use of those ingredients. The proportions, are you using the right amount of this, the right amount of that? Are you using them deftly? Are you using them thoughtfully so you don't have too much and you're using it at this different stage, right? If you're, if anybody has ever like baked cookies or baked a cake, the stage really matters, right? You can't add, the yeast at the very end. You got to add it at the right moment. So the final personal statement that you develop is kind of like a recipe that you have spent time finally crafting, finally honing, because you've practiced, right? And the practice is the drafting. The drafting process helps you understand the use of those ingredients. And anyone who has spent any time around a kitchen, AKA an admissions officer in this perspective, who has read thousands of essays, they know excellent when they see it. They know excellence in a recipe when they see it. They understand precision and purpose in a recipe when they see it. So you can probably tell that I really like cooking, but I think that this is a good metaphor for how we think about what excellence in writing looks like. It is a finely crafted, perfectly honed recipe that you have developed over time and through practice. So let's look at organization a little bit. So I like to go paragraph by paragraph. So in the first paragraph of this essay, the student opens with a very specific moment, time, and place. We're talking about their youth. We're talking about a pagoda, and we're using details to draw the reader in, right? We're talking about the incense-laden air. We're talking about the gong, the robes of the monks, right? So we have a very beautiful image that's deeply accessible that kind of invites the reader into this world in the first paragraph. Then in the second paragraph, the student builds on what's in the opening, right? If Buddhism was introduced as a part of her family in the opening paragraph, in the second paragraph, they take responsibility for Buddhism. I go to the pagoda wanting deeper practice. So I make a choice. I take some agency. I make a decision to deepen my relationship to the topic. So we see these sentences like seeking deeper instruction, which signal to us a choice that I made. In paragraph 3, we have a very specific pivot. So it's no longer just about practicing Buddhism or learning Buddhism, but we're about to tell the reader why these first 2 paragraphs are important. And it's important because there were family emergency, family illness that made these practices in the first 2 paragraphs relevant. Again, it adds context to the choices that this student is making. So there is a little bit something unexpected, which again, keeps the reader engaged. The reader didn't necessarily know from the beginning of the essay that actually we were going to be talking about helping your family. We thought maybe it would be about Buddhism only, but actually it becomes deeper, more sophisticated. It is about Buddhism and how it helped me help my family members, right? So we're taking an opportunity to draw connections into different areas of the student's life. In paragraph 4, we're beginning some deep reflection. This is insight. This is the student understanding the impact of these experiences on them over time. How has it helped me grow? How has it changed me? How has it given me deeper insights that, again, that were unexpected? So there is a feeling of authenticity and genuine growth that we see in this paragraph. So we get some deep consideration, again, on the personal nature of suffering. And then in the paragraph 5, we get the finality of their conclusions and really the payoff, right? What are the unexpected takeaways, the surprising takeaways? And really, this is where we see the ultimate elegance in the essay. There is this kind of beautiful seamlessness in the essay. Everything flows from paragraph 2, 3, 4, and 5, but there's an enormous amount of effort to make sure that each paragraph is efficient so that we're not getting stuck or rushing any areas, right? It flows very naturally. And by the time we get to the end, the reader could not necessarily have predicted until the last moment that this is where we would end up. And so we call this kind of the payoff. We're basically making it worthwhile for the reader to stay engaged through the entire essay. So this is kind of what I'm saying, where every single paragraph has to have a purpose, it has to have a job, has to have a role, and it has to be a unique and important role for the overall journey of the essay. And this is hard work, right? This is the result of many, many drafts to get to this particular organizational perspective. So overall, nothing in this essay is wasted. Nothing is kind of extra or extraneous or indulgent. Every word is selected with purpose and precision. So now let's look a little bit at the student's use of language. How is the student kind of using language to support clarity so that we really understand what they're talking about specifically? So we use these really captivating descriptions that create a sense of vivid image in the imagination. Incense-laden air, as I mentioned earlier, yellow-robed monks, or the physical experience of arching my stiff back. So anyone, even someone unfamiliar with Buddhism or meditation, can relate, can see these images. So these images help create markers over time, over the course of the essay, for the reader to have a clear idea and really kind of follow what the writer is talking about. The writer also talks very conceptually. So it's not just the images, but it is also kind of a deep and specific language related to the ideas of Buddhism, right? Suffering arises from attachment. In fact, it exists in the simplest moments. I used to think, right? So we're getting all of these phrases that highlight a deeper and deeper understanding and growth over time, right? I thought this way once, and now after this experience, I have a deeper understanding now. Now I think this way. We also have some topic-specific language that helps us understand that the student is kind of an expert in this area, right? Signaling meditation, no self, Zen, that lets us understand that this actually is a topic that is fairly deeply understood to the student. There's some level of expertise. So the vocabulary that is being chosen, again, is very precise. The student is not just using kind of showy SAT style vocabulary words to kind of, show off or brush their shoulders off a little bit, but again, is only using vocabulary that demonstrates understanding of which words are required to express each point. So we see a kind of a natural fluency in the student's writing that really demonstrates not just I can speak English, but I know how to use it to a very deep reflective extent. So again, we see the student's versatility both in images that's kind of created, both conceptually and topically, and that helps us kind of intuit that this student will have no problem writing in college, because again, no matter what you major in US universities, you're going to do a lot of writing, a lot of essay writing, argumentative writing, maybe sometimes creative writing. And so these essays, and I didn't mention this earlier, but of course, these essays help us understand your level as a writer. And are you ready for a college level writing? Because it's so important. You have to be ready to write a lot in college. Let's also look at some of the conventions. So I think the main thing to talk about conventions here is it's not about kind of ticking the boxes of grammatical frameworks, but it is talking about kind of dynamic use of language. And by dynamic, I mean variation a little bit. So we have long sentences, right? Like the first time I saw him after surgery, he was lying in a hospital bed with wires protruding from different parts of his body. There was a 50-50 chance he would fully recover or live the rest of his life with severely limited mobility. So this is a very sophisticated compound sentence with multiple clauses, right? You even have a semicolon here, and yet it flows. Nothing is extraneous or extra in the sentence, but it demonstrates a level of mastery to know how to structure sentences like this. By contrast, We also have shorter sentences, right? But such is life that we must adapt to changing circumstance, right? Very precise, very clear. And this sentence is at the end of a paragraph that serves as a transition sentence for the student. So again, the thing to recognize about conventions and structure is, do you know how to use the different structural frameworks in grammar and phrasing to forward your point, and again, to keep the reader engaged. So the final thing that we'll look at is values, which really answers the question, what do we learn about this student from the essay specifically? So we learn a few things specifically about them. They are committed to their family and loved ones. We learn that they are interested in the spiritual aspect of life. We learn that they're able to meet unexpected challenges with openness and resilience and adaptability. And importantly, it's useful to ask, are these values unique to the student? Of course they're not, but we understand them to be genuine and authentic values that this student has reflected on in their essay based on their specific experience. And that's the key. The key is not always to be so original that no one else has ever touched anything else that you're doing, right? Like sometimes I will say, like, unless you've gone to Mars, in which case go to Mars. But usually the majority of our topics are not going to be original, but you can be specific. Original and specific are not the same. And that's important, I think, to realize. Okay, so I want you to take a second and write down any kind of remarks or things that you noticed or things that you potentially are learning about what we just talked about related to content, organization, language, conventions, values. And as we read this next essay, I want you to do the analysis yourself. And again, same thing, I'm going to kind of at the end, I'm going to read some things in the chat. You don't have to wait for me. You can just add them to the chat. I'll read what people are kind of observing before we start kind of our group analysis. So this next student, again, very excellent writing, but dramatically different from the first essay. And I want you to really sense the way that the tools are the same. Content, organization, language, conventions, the tools are the same. The metrics for analysis are the same. The execution is completely different. The way that this actually exhibits in this student's essay, completely different. And I think that's important to understand, because it is not that you need to write some predetermined formula of essay. In fact, you don't want to do that. The most excellent essays are essays that are unique to you based on your experience and voice, and that's going to look very different. As many different students as there will be that many different kinds of essays. So let's read. And I apologize, there is a little bit of Vietnamese in here, and probably my pronunciation is probably not that great, and I apologize in advance. Let me take a little sip of water. Okay, onward. After class one day, I was chatting with my French teacher, a Vietnamese man who cherishes the Vietnamese language, when he suddenly interrupted my point to call me out for speaking English. I paused. The words I had just uttered were definitely Vietnamese. Perplexed, I rewound the sentence in my head and looked at him with a frown. Realizing my mistake, I rephrased, and he smiled mischievously. I had used English syntax in a Vietnamese sentence, a choice that many in my generation make nowadays as English has become more influential. My teacher wistfully shared that he felt we were forgetting our mother tongue, opting for English expressions even in the simplest of situations. For example, many of my peers now regularly say, "Em có ổn không?" a phrase that didn't exist a generation ago, meaning, "Are you okay?" Rather than using one of the many native expressions to inquire about someone's well-being, my peers and I increasingly choose direct word-for-word translations from English. We're speaking Vietnamese words, but we're phrasing a Western sentiment. This is something of a loss, because in its own most fluent form, my mother tongue is a highly versatile and emotionally expressive language. Vietnamese is an isolating language, which means that the smallest unit with any meaning, a morpheme, is also a complete word with all of its nuances. By contrast, not all morphemes in English or in French are complete words, though they all serve a signifying purpose. A compound word is created by adding two or more morphemes that are already words themselves, which creates a powerful result. For example, the word thông minh is roughly used to mean intelligent, However, Tongming is the result of adding Tong, which suggests vastness and expansiveness, and Ming, which means light or bright. A Tongming person is more than just intelligent. Their knowledge is vast, and they possess a clear thinking process as if they had been blessed with brightness. This contrasts with other words for smart, like lat loi or hongwan, which carry very different subtleties due to their morphological construction. As students of Vietnam become increasingly literate in English, they have adopted what's known in sociolinguistics as a positive language attitude towards English and a negative language attitude towards Vietnamese. In their minds, English is associated with Western civilization and developed economies. Speaking English well confers status. Studying linguistics has introduced me to a more scientific approach to languages that has changed how I view both Vietnamese and foreign language study. By learning about the history, phonology, and lexicology of my mother tongue, I realized how it carries incredible emotional versatility, which can only be understood by those who have lived within a Vietnamese context for an extended period of time. This is most clearly illustrated by the uncountable number of personal pronouns we have in Vietnamese. Choosing the right pronoun is an art that involves knowing the exact relationship between the two speakers. This versatility is lost in English, where there is only you and I, and even the division of you into tu and vous in French, or ni and nin in Chinese, cannot convey the subtlety that Vietnamese pronouns convey. I am not a prescriptivist, but like my French teacher, I often feel pensive when I notice how my mother tongue is being relinquished. However, I also know that languages, all languages, have to evolve over time, borrowing expressions and adapting to the changing social circumstances of their speakers. While Vietnamese is not an endangered language, I can envision a future when dominant languages continue to put pressure on languages like Vietnamese until they fall into obscurity. If more native speakers realize the unique versatility and nuanced expressiveness of our mother tongue, we might feel compelled to value and protect it, even amidst change and adaptation. So, what are the things that you noticed? In the chat, I'd love you to comment what stood out to you about the content, the organization, the use of language, the use of conventions, and the students' values. So just as we kind of looked at, take a second and think, what did you feel in this essay? What did you notice? What did you understand or learn about this student? And how did you get that experience over time through the ideas, through the use of language or the use of topics or conventions, sentence length, grammatical features? And how, if you were an admissions officer, how would you use this essay to make an assessment or an analysis of how this student would contribute to your campus? So I'll read a little bit. How mentions the grammar and use of vocabulary is on point for me. I agree. The uncommon words do not overpower the common counterpoint and vice versa. And the flexibility of her grammar is great. Yeah, I agree. I think that's super right. What else? What else are people noticing? What else did you notice about this essay from a content perspective or an organization perspective? Did any particular words jump out to you that felt really specific, or any particular phrases jump out to you? What do you remember about this essay? Take a second and you can think. And I will, I'll go back actually, so that you can maybe reread and look at different sentences and remind you what you read. Quing Ang notices that the topic is very interesting and up to date. Yeah, I think what you mean by up to date is that it's pretty relevant. Yeah, these things are happening, right? If you're a native Vietnamese speaker, you might be able to relate to what's happening in this essay. It speaks to a phenomenon that maybe many people, but probably not necessarily an admissions officer, might be exposed to, right? What else? Anybody else have any observations about what this essay brings up for them? The experience, the impact? Okay. So again, the reason why I ask you these questions is because, and we do this a lot with our students, practicing analysis, understanding and evaluating essays will really help you strengthen your own use of those particular skills. Howe says the content isn't really focused on how they describe themselves. However, throughout the essay, we can imagine clearly, and the essay also illustrates their personality, their talents, the ability to use lingo with direct mention to it. Yeah, totally. So here's some of the things that I notice in this content. Right. So if we talk at the most basic level, the topic is linguistics, but also linguistics related to language and identity. And as I mentioned last time, you can think about the topic as the container for an essay. It's really the vehicle. We're not necessarily writing an essay about linguistics. We're using the topic of linguistics to make some specific points about me or about the way that I see the world, about my own growth, about my own change over time. So the individual specificity here, the thing that makes this an essay about this student, not just linguistics, is that we talk about their French class, we talk about research, we talk about the use of compound morphological words in Vietnamese. So we actually get to learn a little bit. So I want to point out that selecting this topic was a little bit of a strategic choice because this student knew perfectly well that they were going to study linguistics. They had a lot of research, they had taken extra classes, they had read books, they were just passionate about linguistics. And this works, I think, in this student's favor because linguistics is an uncommon enough interest at the undergraduate level. Most people who are going to study linguistics are going to be introduced to it a little bit later, either in college or in graduate school at some point. This is a little bit more of a difficult choice to make if you're choosing a more common major interest like economics or math or computer science, where like really, a lot of students, a lot of applicants are interested. So this student chose to kind of flex their intellectual strength and say, hey, I know that I'm probably reasonably unique in my in-depth study of linguistics, and I'm going to share that with you. So let's look at the organization and how this kind of works over time. So number one is we're starting with an anecdote, right? We're drawing the reader in through direct memory, a conversation with the French teacher that introduces the overall themes. And so it's kind of done rather cleverly, right? The French teacher is calling the student out for speaking English using Vietnamese words. And so there's a really interesting feeling of not quite debate, but negotiation, of a little bit of tension. And the reader's going to want to know, like, what is all this about? Like, why do I feel a little bit, strange about this, about being told that I did something wrong? And now the writer has a problem to solve in the rest of the essay and explain, well, I've told you about this because my investigation into linguistics has helped me understand a more sophisticated, nuanced approach to the topic of linguistics. Importantly, tied to my personal experience as a young Vietnamese person, a native speaker who has studied English and has studied French and has studied Chinese. And so I have some specific insight, right, is what the student is saying. It also introduces a point for analysis. We're using syntax, right? And syntax is like a reasonably sophisticated grammatical concept, right? People study syntax in all manner of different academic disciplines. And so the student is saying, hey, I'm going to use this example of syntax to illustrate the social change that I see happening. And it's kind of clever. It's a unique approach to say, I'm going to look at social change in Vietnam through the lens of syntax and my experience as a young Vietnamese person. And that's kind of clever. It's a unique kind of approach. And what it tells us is actually this student really does understand linguistics and social linguistics or sociolinguistics to a reasonably deep level. So when they say, I've studied linguistics deeply, we believe them. It's not just kind of some made up nonsense. So the reader also is so kind of skilled in their understanding of linguistics that they can even teach the reader something. So if I'm an admissions officer, I probably don't know anything about Vietnamese morphological structure. And so this student is like, I'm going to teach you in a paragraph and kind of make you understand something you probably haven't understood, but I'm going to do it very simply and very accessibly. And that's kind of clever. And again, keeps the reader engaged. I want to keep reading, right? Because I'm learning something, I'm engaged, it's interesting, and it's specific. We also choose some kind of like contrasting experiences, some contrasting examples to give the reader a little bit of reference points. So we talk about Tongming as an example of smart, but then we kind of break it down. We look at other words smart. We break the words Tong and Ming down and look at them individually. And it's kind of like a big undertaking, right? So to be able to do this in one paragraph successfully takes a lot of work to be really clear and really precise. You can imagine that this could be done very poorly. It could be messy and complicated and confusing. And we could be like, wait, why am I reading about linguistics? But actually the execution here is done very nicely, right? It keeps the reader focused. So again, the execution here is everything that matters. The fourth paragraph is kind of like a contextualizing analysis point for, this answers like the why of the essay. I'm telling you about this essay because in my individual experience, right, I have seen that our relationship to Vietnamese is changing. And that says something about our society or our identity. And more importantly, my understanding of that has changed over time. I used to feel this way, and now I feel this way. Finally, the student is kind of taking a step back and saying, kind of projecting out into the future and saying, if this trend continued, I could see that this might happen, right? Vietnamese might fall into obscurity. And so I'm hoping that we will all begin to kind of cherish our language a little bit more, understand its unique features because it is special and it is unique. And by the time the reader gets there, the reader completely believes the student. The reader says, yeah, totally. The way that you have shared your experience, I can totally understand why this language is unique and interesting and related to identity, and we've seen that through your experience. So it's a big undertaking, this essay, but it is kind of masterfully done. And so now let's look a little bit at the use of language. So again, we're using a lot of technically specific language. We're using words like morphological, syntax, sociolinguistics, phonology. And this could go either way. This could feel like a brag and it could feel like a flex, or we could be like, no, yeah, only a student who really understands these things would drop them in here to let us know, like, hey, I've studied those to a pretty like technically advanced degree. We're also using some very precise English vocabulary to show, again, dynamism, creative use of English for expression. We're using words like obscurity, nuanced expressiveness, a Western sentiment. And any Western reader will feel like these are very natural expressions. These are very natural phrases. And it takes a pretty advanced level of fluency to be able to write this way. So we're getting, not just can the student write critically and technically, they can also write creatively. We also have like an adept use of Vietnamese vocabulary words explained in English for contrast, which is kind of clever, right? So the reader feels like they're learning something very quickly, and that's kind of cool. To be able to explain something simply that is a complex thing can only be done if you have mastery over that thing. And so this is an intentionally chosen tactic that the student has used. Then let's look at construction or conventions a little bit, right? Because of the skill demonstrated in this essay, and particularly their use of linguistics, the reader has kind of no concerns at all about the student's ability to succeed in English in an English-speaking environment, academically, rigorous, and in a variety of different writing contexts. Specifically, we know that they have an ability to use a broad range of complex grammar, including examples like this, which is this is like a really big mouthful of a sentence, but it's beautiful, right? This versatility is lost in English, where there is only you and I, and even the division of you into tu and vous in French, or ni and nin in Chinese, cannot convey the subtlety that Vietnamese pronouns convey. Long sentence, lots of different punctuation. We have quotation marks, we have parentheticals, we have two different clauses, a beefy kind of sentence, but really effective, right? Because a sentence like this undertakes to explain a complex thing, pronouns in 3 different languages, but done in a very accessible way. And again, the result of this is the reader believes that, yeah, man, the student really does understand this topic very deeply. Conventions, interestingly also refers to kind of the cadence or the movement or the flow of an essay, right? The question is, can you use language to keep a forward moving pace? That's not just about
paragraphs ending. It is about the dynamic use of phrases like long sentences and short sentences, and repetition in sentence use, or to show parallels. And so this kind of sentence variation helps, again, it's a subtle thing that you might miss if you're not looking for it, but it is one of the things that gives reading a sense of movement and prevents the reader from getting bored, or from the energy from stalling, or for our like attention to drift. I like to call this cadence, right? And cadence is it's a musical term that has to do with the way that we stay engaged as notes or ingredients change over time. Importantly, one of the things I think to notice is the reader really never stumbles over the writer's language. Even though we're doing something very complex, it's a pretty fluid, seamless execution. Now, you as a reader might say, well, maybe I would have done this or that different, but those are artistic choices, not necessarily, there's nothing dysfunctional or not functioning optimally in this essay. And because the student has chosen every sentence, we get a sense of the way that they evaluate writing choices, right? There are a lot of choices that are only very specific to an individual writer's preference or voice. And so again, we get a lot of individuality in this essay. The last thing is values. What do we learn about this student? We understand that they are intellectually rigorous and a fairly unique subject area, linguistics. We also know that they're willing to kind of challenge cultural norms, right? Even within themselves, right? Like phrasing Western sentiments using Vietnamese syntax. We also understand that they're kind of proud of their heritage, proud of their language, proud of where they come from, that they're capable of extrapolating social trends into the future and anticipating, if this thing continues, this might happen. And maybe I have some concerns about that. Taken together with other aspects of this student's application, letters of recommendation, transcript, SATs, ACTs, activities list, the admissions officers clearly see preparation, preparedness, readiness on the student's behalf. If this student comes to this school, any school, they will be able to succeed, no question about it. I want to look for a moment about what that context looks like. So Spark Prep has come to call this kind of like the circle of life, but this is really just the way of understanding what are the different features of your application and what role do the essays play. So you can kind of think that the different aspects of your application are your academics, and that has to do with your transcript and your grades, as well as your test scores. We have your activities list and your recommendation letters, which really talk about your character, your leadership, your commitments. And then we have your own growth and values and reflection. That comes up in the essays. And remember, this is the place that at the time you start working on your essays, you have the most control over in your application. Usually by the time you start working on your essays, you don't have any control over your grades or your transcripts because most of that's done already, or your recommendations because it's done already. But your essays are the one thing that you have full control over. And so the question that you ask is, what's missing from my application? What does a reader want to focus on for 2 minutes that will help them understand me at a very deep, nuanced, and subtle level? I'm going to switch gears here as we kind of like move towards the final portion of the webinar. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the struggles that students sometimes have when they first start essay writing, particularly in the college application process. And I want to be clear that there's nothing wrong with these mistakes. These are very normal, they're understandable, they're very common, and importantly, they're all mistakes that you can move beyond. So if these are mistakes that you're experiencing, I don't want you to worry, right? There's ways to move past them, to build, to grow your facility and your talents beyond. Usually it's going to come down to practice, and I'll talk about that kind of at the end. So the first and number one mistake that I see students write, and we're talking about like all the students that we've worked with, is trying to write someone else's essay. And there's kind of two different versions of that. The first is trying to think like, what does the admissions officer like want to hear, and thinking about it only from their perspective, like what's a good essay? And that's, in some ways like the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, what's my essay? Maybe that sounds a little bit cliche, but actually it puts you in the right frame of mind. The frame of mind, what did they want to read, takes us out of ourselves. It puts us external to our experience, when really the material that you're going to be developing is all internal. It's all kind of like inside of you. And the work is to pull it out, is to understand it, seek it out, excavate it. And so if your focus is only external, right? My parents said I should write about this, or my sister said I should write about this, or the admissions officer, like, I read a blog and like, they like to hear about X, Y, and Z. That can shift your frame of reference so that you have a real difficult time writing something authentic. Similarly, you might be trying to mimic someone else's essay and be like, oh, my sister wrote about sports, and so I'm going to write about sports. Or, my cousin's brother's aunt's supervisor accountant wrote about, the first time I went to study abroad, and so I'm going to do that. And like, sure, those topics might serve as inspiration, but trying to just kind of like copy someone else's experience and insight will often feel disingenuous. It just won't feel really that authentic. So this is more as like a starting point mistake. As a starting point, try not to write someone else's essay or think about other people too much. First, you want to think about what's important for me to express, right? What's vital for me? What is deep and meaningful and important? Ask those questions first. The second mistake that I often see is people staying kind of too literal. And again, this becomes a little bit more of an organizational feature. Once you kind of decide on your topic, most people will write in a chronological order. Their first draft will be like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And that's not necessarily the way that our brains work as readers. Readers are very skilled at reading things that happen in different time periods and tying them all together when done right. The reality also is that, this is a little bit of a philosophical comment, but memory is really a composite of the past. It is the way we have retold that story over and over again, or the way that we have remembered it. Sometimes we add features or subtract features. So you can take some creative license when you're reflecting on an image or a memory or a conversation. It doesn't need to be 1,000% the actual words that happen. Now, that isn't to say that you should make up events. Don't do that. But it does mean that you can draw on the feeling or the vibe or the insight to craft images or anecdotes that are approximations or composites of what actually happened. Most vitally, you'll see that in both of the essay examples that we read, at different moments throughout the essay, the writer took an opportunity to show an experience or show a moment or show a feeling rather than tell. There's a difference between saying, I was sad versus, I felt the tightness in my chest clench, right? When you say that, you understand, most people understand tightness happens in the chest during a feeling of intensity or sadness. And what we're looking to give is we're looking to give readers an opportunity to empathize and connect with your experience based on these shared human vocabulary that many of us have. Even if I have not, gone through exactly what you've gone through, as a human being, I'm tuned to try and empathize with your experience. And when you show me your experience, it's so much easier for me to connect with that experience than when you tell me about it. This is one of the things that students struggle with the most, is showing, not telling. And in fact, this is, when they teach writing in middle school or high school in the United States, this phrase, show, don't tell, you hear it all the time. And yet it is actually like very difficult because it's a skill, right? And so you have to practice how to show people the things that you're wanting to draw their focus on. The other thing with staying too literal is staying too literal often misses the nuance, right? If I'm just kind of like, describing this phone and its physical features, I might be forgetting to talk about the meaning, right? And why that's important, the purpose, the understanding, the insight. And nuance is one of the things that will differentiate you from anybody else, right? The depth of your insight, the more you can challenge your understanding of what's happening, the more you can discover. The third thing is rushing the process. And rushing the process will get you every time. There's no such thing as someone who's written a really, really, truly excellent essay. Maybe there's such a thing, but that's like 1 in a million, right? Hoping that your first draft or even your second draft or your third draft will be your final draft. It just doesn't work that way. the essay builds into excellence through the writing process, and you just can't rush it. For many students, particularly in Vietnam, when they haven't had an enormous amount of experience or time to practice their writing skills outside of school, it takes some time to explore, to dig, to try, to experiment, to really pull good material out and then begin to shape it and hone it and structure it. So don't rush the process. You got to give it time. The other thing when you rush the process, right, if you start writing your applications only, a month before the deadline or even 2 months, stress gets in the way of a creative process, right? Just because the way that we're biologically structured as mammals is stress hormones preclude the brain from being creative, right? Because the way that works kind of, when our ancestors were really stressed, that was not the time for writing poetry. That was the time for like running away and finding shelter or getting food, right? So being in a positive mindset, or being in a mindset that allows for creativity, that allows for expression, will really, really help. And you can't really do that when you're under stress and when you're rushing the process. The fourth thing is writing without a structure or a plan. Most students can't just kind of like sit in front of a screen and just like have the words descend from heaven into their brain. Mostly it takes some brainstorming sessions, some looking for inspiration, but also writing with allowing things to be messy is totally fine if you have the right tools that can begin to shape it over time, right? The first draft that our students always write, we call it the ugly draft, right? And we call it ugly because I don't want students to do their writing in their head. I want students to do the writing on the page. And that can only happen if things get out of the brain and we can start kind of like working with it and shaping it and deleting things and moving things around. The other thing, writing without a plan, is really thinking about your essay in isolation rather than as a component of the rest of your application, right? Really imagining how your essays fit together with the rest of your applications, your letters of recommendation, your activities, your supplementary essays, etc. Right? So you want to, again, think about it from a strategic perspective. I sometimes call this like the bird's eye view perspective, and come back to that every now and then, right? Come back to that every now and then and imagine, how does my essay fit in with the rest of my application? The last thing is just being too hard on yourself, right? Being too hard on yourself, right? Particularly like before you started writing, some students will be like, oh, I don't have anything interesting to write about. I hear this all the time. I don't have anything interesting to write about. And this is almost never true and is mostly just a failure of imagination. But if you've already predetermined that you're not interesting, it's very difficult to be open to discovering something interesting about yourself. All the 2 essays that we wrote or that we read today, students did not show up on day 1 and say, I know that this is what I'm going to write about. This is my essay topic. It was the result of conversation and exploration and discovery and consideration and reading, right? And these topics kind of emerge. It's not a thing that you just kind of like show up in the lottery and you're like, oh, I guess this is my topic, right? You got to give yourself a little bit of time and know that it's a growth process. You will become a better writer by giving it a little bit of time. But if you don't give yourself the chance, you won't really be able to see the fruits of your labor. So what are the different ways to avoid these errors? So unsurprisingly, the first thing is write, particularly for young writers. And I saw there's a lot of students here who are in grade 10 and grade 9. So now is the perfect time to develop a writing practice. When you're young and you're in grade 9 or grade 10 or even earlier, it doesn't matter if your writing is good as long as you're doing a lot of it, right? And oftentimes I'll give my students a challenge and I'll say, if by the end of high school, you write 100,000 words or 50,000 words, you will be an extremely better writer than you were at the beginning, just by virtue of the fact that you've gotten through the practice, right? You've forced your brain to shove communication down your thoughts, down your hands into this expressive mechanism called typing, called writing. And just that routine, just that practice makes us better writers. So whether that is a blog or journaling or writing in a diary or writing creative stories or poetry, it really doesn't matter as long as you start. Don't wait to start today, start tomorrow, right? Most people think that a lot of people are afraid. They're like, oh, I don't like my writing, and so I'm not a good writer, and so I'm just not going to write. You'll never get good at writing that way. The way that you will get good at writing is by writing a ton, and then eventually you become good at writing. And every author will tell you exactly the same thing. Yeah, there's no better way to become a better writer than actually just writing a ton. And then you edit, right? So excellence is the result of draft, and then edit, and then we get to excellence eventually. Nobody, very, very few people start with excellence, almost nobody. You get to it, you arrive at it through process. The second thing is, actually, the last point I will say about writing is be specific. And even more specific than that, particularly in your essay writing for colleges. Specificity is the thing that will help us understand that it is your essay as opposed to someone else's essay. And again, this is one of the things that a lot of students struggle with, but the more specific you can be, the easier it will be for us to get a sense of who you are. The second aspect of how to avoid these pitfalls is read. And again, kind of same concept here. Read articles, read blogs, read books, read nonfiction, read poetry, read fiction, read popular science, read journals. The writing and reading go hand in hand, particularly if you have a practice of analyzing what you're reading. Oh, that's an interesting paragraph. How did that happen? Or, oh man, that feeling came out of nowhere. How did that happen? And beginning to analyze and develop kind of an analytical framework will help you understand how you might be able to use those tools. So reading, writing, back and forth, same time. And particularly because reading will inspire you. Good reading will always inspire you. From a time management perspective, always make sure you start early, particularly when you have an assignment. SparkPrep students students who are applying this year, we've already started. Most of our students already have first or second drafts or third drafts of their essays, and it's June. So we start really, really early with our students because we want to give them an opportunity to develop their writing skills. We don't want them to like get finished as quickly as possible. We want them to get to excellence, and that takes time. So start early and stay open to change. Your first draft might not be it. Your second draft might not be it. Your third draft might not be it. So you got to stay open. It's very, I think, useful to think about writing as an art form. It is like painting. It is like cooking. It is like music. It has different components, and it needs time for us to figure out how those components work best together. Right. And so you got to treat writing, I think, with a lot of respect so that you can also understand what are the tools that will help me distill it and refine it and make it really excellent, and also make it mine. The final thing that you want to do is really think about your personal statement content against all the other activities in your, all the other aspects of your application, your activities list, supplemental essays, because all of these things work together. Your application is, I think we talked about, it's the circle of life here, right? Everything works together. The last thing that I'll suggest is you should work with a coach, right? Working with a coach who can give you structured writing feedback, who can teach you, who can give you perspective, who can point you towards things, who can help you problem solve, who can keep you inspired, who can kind of mentor you so that you become a really confident writer. And that's really our goal for all our students. We want you to go to college feeling confident and capable that you'll be able to work through any of the writing assignments that you're giving in college. Is really important to us. So from a tool perspective, the things you want to think about that will help you, I think, approach your writing from a systematic way is content, what you write about, and importantly, why you write about it. What's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? All of that is a function of your content. And then your structure helps us understand that content over time, sentence to sentence, paragraph by paragraph, section by section. It is the thing that makes your writing accessible and engaging to the reader for the 2 minutes that it will take them to read it. Finally, there is the style, your use of language, your use of conventions, the way that your values exhibit themselves. It is the personality in your essay, and that can only be achieved by writing as a practice. So again, now that we've gone through a few different aspects of the writing process, I wonder if you can put in the chat, what are some things that you feel like you're still struggling with? And I will open up the chat, and I think I'd be interesting to hear, what do people What are people still struggling with? Tools. What are the tools that feel most difficult? Is it content? Is it topics? Is it making sure that your values are clear? Is it structure and organization? What are the things that you're still struggling with a little bit? Yeah, Locke says style and structure. Totally. Yeah, structure is really challenging. It does get easier once you write a lot. Yeah. And the thing that I will suggest to a lot of students is when you're working with structure, your first draft, you want to think about it as building blocks, and you can move those building blocks around, right? Take your last paragraph and make it your first paragraph. Take your middle paragraph, make it your last paragraph. Cut your whole first paragraph all together, right? Yeah, so Locke is saying I will write 1,000 words and still don't know what I've just written, right? And structure, right? Make sure you're using those paragraphs and really ask yourself, what point do I want to make here? Really what we're talking about when we talk about structure is logic, right? We're talking about logic. Is your thought process clear? And sometimes our own thought process isn't quite clear. And so the early drafting process helps us get clear, right? The early drafting can be an answer to the question, I don't know what's important to me. Let me write and find out. Let me write about this topic, not necessarily with the purpose of writing a perfect essay, but understanding my own orientation. Let me ask some challenging questions. So early drafting can be as much about a discovery process as it can be about actually writing an essay. Ming Cho says content and structure. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And again, these are going to be very much things that will become easier as you just write. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be good at all. Anybody else? What are other people writing about or struggling with? Are anybody else struggling with structure or content or language or conventions? Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to do one last review of the circle of life, which we talked about. That brings us to the end of the webinar. I'm just going to do a quick kind of introduction to Spark Prep if you're not familiar with us, and I see we already have some of our students on the call. Hello, wonderful to see you. So Spark Prep's been working in Vietnam for almost a decade or so. Corey Marquis and I started started Spark Prep after graduating from Stanford. We both wrote honors theses. We have probably more than 2 decades of admissions work at this point if we're looking at all the different team members we have who work with us. We have clients all around the world. We have dozens of specialists who come from some of the most reputable institutions. And we've worked with hundreds of students, both on graduate and undergraduate admissions essays. And what I'll say is that our goal and our philosophy as a company is to make sure that the admissions process be what we call student-centered. We want students to feel supported. We want them to feel nourished, encouraged. We want them to feel confident and like they're capable of meeting any challenge with kind of our support and mentorship, even though things are hard sometimes, and they are going to be hard. So we want things to be valuable, and we want students to really feel like they can do it, you know? So everybody on our team kind of shares that same ethic and that same ethos. If you'd like to learn more about us, in the chat, Zoe will put her email address and you can set up a meeting. We have free consultations for anybody who wants to learn more about Spark Prep and the way we work with students on college applications. If you've just finished grade 11 and you're thinking about applying to college this year, or if you've just finished grade 10, now's a really great time to chat with us and maybe get some support on your college application process. That is going to wrap it up for us today. I'm going to open the question and answer session. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, I'd be happy to. You can either put them in the chat or you can ask them in the question and answer little box down there. First, I think I need to end my sharing. Okay, so the first question comes from Anonymous, and Anonymous asks, do I have to mention my ECs or something similar? And the answer is no. In your essay, you do not necessarily have to answer your extracurriculars. Some students do, some students don't. It is not required. I think about it as like, what's a strategic choice? You will have other opportunities to talk about your extracurriculars in other areas of your application, oftentimes in your supplementary essays. but it is not a requirement that your personal statement be about your extracurriculars. Zhang asks, I read a lot, but struggle with transforming ideas into my own words. Yeah, same. My suggestion to you is going to be exploration. I think journaling is really, really useful here. Sometimes having a little bit of a point of focus, right? Having a prompt that you're responding to. There are all these like websites that have, hundreds of essay prompt, like little writing prompts that can give you like a 5-minute exercise or a 10-minute exercise or a 30-minute exercise, just to kind of get you focused and really targeted on what you're writing about. Some students, it's a little bit more freeform, right? Like, during the days before social distancing, my favorite thing would be to like grab my journal and go to a cafe and sit and have a coffee and just like think and feel, and sometimes listen to music and then write my feelings, and then the writing comes that way. So there's a lot of different ways you can enter writing. I want you to think about it that way, right? There's no right way to enter the writing process or start the writing process. It is just that you do start the writing process. And the more you start over and over and over and over and over again, start hundreds of times, thousands of times in your life, the easier it will get. It's very hard the first time. It's hard the first 5 times, hard the first 10 times, might even be hard the first couple of dozens of times, but you'll start to slowly feel that it gets easier. So don't be discouraged by starting. Just make sure that you do start. She says, how many words should my essay contain? If we're talking about the personal statement for the common application, the word limit is 650 words. It can be no longer than 650 words. Most people will say anywhere between 500 and 650 words is fine. The correct answer is as many words as you need in order to sufficiently and excellently answer the essay or write a good essay, but it has to be under 650 words for the personal statement on the common application. Za says, I have trouble structuring my essay. More specifically, I don't know how to fit the ideas together into one cohesive essay. After seeing the 2 examples from the 2 students, I wonder if there is a process where I can follow so I can better set up my essay structure. Yeah, the answer is outlines. So often I will have students write an ugly draft, and it's like, right, a little bit chaotic. And then I will you remember in the organization analysis that I did, I said paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, paragraph 5. You want to do the same thing and say paragraph 1, my purpose is. Paragraph 2, my purpose is. Paragraph 3, my purpose is. And like that will give you a bird's eye view to outline this way, even a very blunt way, to see if there's any holes or opportunities that you've missed in going deeper in your writing. Oftentimes people will start with an idea or an experience, but they haven't added the nuance or the insight or the self-reflection. And so if that's missing, that's a paragraph that needs to go in there, right? What's the insight or connections in other areas of your life? So the thing that you want to do in most cases, in order to make it cohesive, is do an outline based on one of your drafts. And you can kind of do this back and forth, draft, outline, as many times as you want, until you feel like you have something that you want to edit, that you want to revise. And then the editing is just about, shaving sentences here or moving paragraphs around here. But the first thing is the outline will function as your roadmap. And then like once you're off and going, then you can make adjustments. Anonymous says, does it harm to be relatively emotional and pessimistic sometimes in my personal statement? It's a good question. So emotional and pessimistic are 2 very different things. Emotions are completely fine. I will say that because you only have 650 words, remember that you do need to keep a reader's interest for 650 words. And it has often been my experience that it's very hard to read 650 words of pure emotion. It gets repetitive. It gets a little bit, it stays superficial, right? Because sometimes emotion can be a single note, right? And you can think about it in music, right? If I'm just like playing one note really, really loud, right? And it's like emotion, it's a really hard thing to listen to. I need some variation. I need some quiet. I need some other notes. I need some chords. I need some sustain. So absolutely emotion can be included as one ingredient in your essay. It can't be the only ingredient because it will be bland, right? Pessimistic, I think, is a strategic choice. I think if that's authentic for you, well, that would be probably my question, is like, is that truly authentic for you? And more importantly, what do you want the reader to learn through that feeling? And do you want them to learn this is a pessimistic person? Is that a useful thing for them to learn in your college application? That's only a question that only you can answer. Anonymous attendee asks, does an essay that sounds negative have particular effect on the assessments of AOs? That sounds pretty similar to last essay. I'm gonna go with yes, if it is just negative. I mean, again, negative is a little bit of a subjective assessment. You can be critical, you can have critique, right? You can have nuance, but you cannot say, well, if it is just negative, and again, just as I said, if it's just a single note of negativity, the issue is not that it's bad, the issue is that it's boring, I'm sorry to say, right? If it's just one single note of negativity. So probably most people would say, right, you don't want the last impression on an admissions officer. You don't want their takeaway to be, this is negative. But sure, critique is valid and criticism is valid, and grappling and struggling and wrestling with life can be valid and can be really powerful if done well. Again, at some point, you want to think about what is the last feeling or thing that I want the admissions officer to understand about me, and that's a strategic decision. Dong says, in case I have too many things that are special about me, which one should I choose to write about? I mean, how to choose an appropriate topic for myself. Well, so I think you want to think about, again, the circle of life a little bit, which is, hold on, I'm going to pin myself so that you can see me. Aha, great. Are they going to learn about those other special things about you in other areas of your application? Will they learn about them in your letters of recommendation? Will they learn about them in your activities list? Which things need to be explicated in your essay, right? Must. And which thing can be delegated to other areas of your application, right? It's totally fine to say, hey, teacher who's writing me a letter of recommendation, you have seen me in this, and this capacity. I think you might be uniquely positioned to comment about this aspect of my application or my personality or my background. And so you can think strategically about delegating different areas that are important to you to other areas of your application. Do you have any tips for SAT history passages? I don't, sorry to say, at the moment. Do I put myself in the position of the reader while I write? Yeah, I think so. I think not necessarily while you write, but certainly while you edit. I think thinking about the takeaway, and this is a little bit of a thin line, because I don't want you to think like the only thing that matters is the reader. I do want you to think at the end, when you're editing and revising, what impact do I want this to have on the reader? That's different from what will the reader like, because you have no idea what the reader will like because you don't know them and you don't know where they are. So that's not the point. However, you can say, I'm hoping to have this impact. I hope to impart this knowledge or this insight or this set of values or this nuanced understanding. And now let me think, if I read this, would I see that, right? You can do it that way. And definitely that's vital. Anonymous attendee says, I don't know what to study yet. So I'm kind of lost when I have to choose what values I should show to make the admissions officer think I know what's going on. You don't have to know what you're going to study. However, you probably have a pretty nuanced understanding of some part of the world. And if you don't think you have that yet, it just means you haven't found it yet. You need to explore a little bit more. Everybody is actually engaged in the world around them to some degree. And if it's not necessarily like in your conscious mind yet, that's where you start. The work is to discover that. The work is to draft or read or be in conversation or watch videos or like wherever there is feeling in your life, find it, scrutinize it, evaluate it, understand it, And then that will help kind of shine a light a little bit more on your internal life until you say, aha, I think this is something worthy for me to explore in an essay. But you don't need to, you 100% don't need to know what your major is going to be to know what your values are, because your major and your values have maybe nothing to do with one another. I mean, maybe they do, but everybody has values. Values, I often will define values as the things that motivate your choices and your actions, right? So whenever you see yourself making a choice, for instance, we all are motivated to eat food when we're hungry because we all have a value of being fed, right? That's not a sophisticated value, but it's something that motivates our actions sometimes. So if you look back over the choices that you've made, your decisions, your actions, your commitments, you can ask yourself, what motivates these commitments? Keep asking that question until you know. That will help you. How many paragraphs should my essay contain? There's no right or wrong answer. I think it should be probably more than one, because a brick of text for 650 words is really hard to read. And probably some people will just default to the 5 or 6 paragraph essay because it's an easy way to do structure, but it can be 7 small paragraphs or 8 small paragraphs. There is some creative license in how many paragraphs you use. This is an organizational and a structural decision. It has to do with what is each paragraph's job. So as long as each paragraph has a job that is not redundant and is being fulfilled by the end of that paragraph, then you're good. And under 650 words. Anonymous attendee says, how can I decide which topic or theme would be suitable for the common essay and which would be for the supplemental essay? Yeah, so you want to, I think, look at the range of supplemental essays and the range of personal statement essay prompts. And usually what we will do with students is we'll do like kind of a map of all the topics, and then we'll look and see like which ones are appropriate for which kinds of supplemental essays. And then I think, because the personal statement is the longest, really the answer is like, what do you have the most to say about? What is the most fundamental, the most important to you? But it should be said that there is a little bit of back and forth, right? None of these things are final until you press the submit button. So it is totally fine to do a little bit of drafting that, some of it goes in your personal statement, and then like, next week I change that content, I move it into my supplemental essays. That's totally fine. Yeah. So again, you can stay creative and you can stay open if a supplemental essay presents itself as suddenly being more relevant for this other topic. I heard about opening essays with a story of mine so it could impress people who read it. I'd like to ask if there is any impressive ways to do my opening. Thank you. Sure. So there's lots and lots of different ways. The thing that I'm going to say is going to sound a little bit boring, and the answer is specific. So as long as there is a specific opening to your essay, and usually that means personal, though not always. Sometimes a story is an easy way to go about it because stories are like often accessible. But what you don't necessarily want to do is be like, I'm going to write an essay about mountain climbing. Chapter 1. You don't necessarily need to introduce the topic literally. So the only thing that's important is that you have some specific, but you can try a bunch of different ways to open your essays. I mean, one of the things that I will often tell students to do is write their introduction last, right? When you're drafting, sometimes we think about like, oh, I got to write my first paragraph and then my second paragraph, and then my third paragraph, and then my fourth paragraph in that order, but you don't. You can write your fourth paragraph first. You can write your third paragraph first. You can write your conclusion first and switch them all around, right? Feel nimble and flexible with how you're writing, right? It does not need to be a chronological process. And oftentimes the reality is you don't actually know what your opening should be until you've been with your draft for a little while. So I would say if there's a strategy for having an impressive opening, it might be to wait a little bit until you have really worked on your core material, your body paragraphs, and really know what your essay is about first. And then you can think about the best way to segue or introduce that content. Does the background setting wherein the AO examine our personal statement exert a certain influence on the examination of my PS? What if the AOs get up on the wrong side of the bed? I'm not really sure what you mean by the background setting. Probably the answer to this question is it doesn't matter because you have no control over it anyway. So it doesn't really matter. This has no impact on your writing is the short answer. Someone says, thanks. You are welcome. Quingang says, do you know any websites to read essays that got into top universities? Yeah, I mean, if you Google essays that got into top universities, a bunch of things will come up. What I will say though is, oftentimes those essays are like self-selected, I think, or sometimes they're like outlandish, or they're not necessarily representative. Because remember, like the essays that we see on the internet are not representative all the time of the thousands of essays that get into those schools every year, right? I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but you can certainly Google it. The College Essay Guy has a bunch of resources on his website. We have essays that we send our students. So yeah. Anonymous says, should I write about abstract topics? For example, my insights into how the universe works. Sure, you could. My only recommendation is always going to be to make sure that it specifically reflects on you somehow and doesn't stay abstract. Essays, the answer to any question that begins with, should I write about? And I get this question 1,000 times a year. The answer to that question, should I write about, is always going to be, you can write about whatever you want as long as the execution is incredible. Because you can write about any topic well, and you can write about any topic very poorly. So it all comes down to execution. There is no such thing. I say this most of the time, and I usually believe it, but by and large, I will rarely say you shouldn't write about this topic because it's a bad topic. Now, there are some topics that are easier to write about than others, or that you might be predisposed to write about based on your experience or your background or your expertise. But there's no such thing as a good topic or a bad topic in an absolute sense. You can, if you feel motivated to write about any topic, if any topic is particularly interesting or important or vital to you, go ahead and write about it. And remember, is this a good essay? Is this a good topic? Will always come down to execution. Is it organized well? Are my values clear? Is my use of language specific? Are my conventions helping me elevate my point and helping the logic flow over the course of my entire essay? Should my essay have a title? Doesn't matter. Can is not required. Some students have titles, some students don't. Either way, personal preference. She says, is it necessary to relate my personal statement to other materials in my application? Necessary? No. Not necessary. I would say no. Yeah, that's an easy question. Anonymous attendee says, do I have to use advanced words in my essay? You do not. No. No such thing as advanced. No, the goal is clarity and precision. Sometimes that uses advanced words. And sometimes I will say that oftentimes I will sometimes see people use advanced words incorrectly or in an unnatural way. And that almost hurts you more because we're like, oh, that feels forced, right? So you want to use any language that feels natural and helps us really kind of stay with your essay and access it. We are not going to be evaluating your essay and be like, oh, this missing 3 vocabulary words, -1 point. That we're not really assessing it that way. The goal is clarity. Are there any materials or books about essay writing? Millions of books about essay writing. I really like Steven Pinker's Sense of Style. Steven Pinker is a professor at Harvard, and he's written tons of books, including Better Angels of Our Nature, a few others that I can't remember, but I really like Sense of Style. There's also a bunch of other books that I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, tons and tons of books about writing essays. Many of them are super great. And if you text me or message me later, I can get you some titles. Can you recommend some bloggers or websites that can help me improve my skill? I don't necessarily read any bloggers myself. Probably I would point you towards Spark Prep. Like we work with students and probably, I don't know, it's a little bit of like a little bit of a name drop here, but probably working with a coach directly might be the best bet. Otherwise, like literally just Googling it, there's sometimes good content just on the website. Again, I'll name drop the college essay guy. I like him. He has good resources. Attendee says, thank you wholeheartedly for your advice. My pleasure. And then we have 2 more questions, then I think we can wrap it up. You did say that one can write about almost any topic, but I might have to disagree with this because I think that extremely controversial topics, i.e. politics, culture, etc., should be avoided. What is your opinion on this? Yeah, no, I don't agree with that. I think politics and culture, there's nothing wrong with so-called controversial topics. Again, it all comes down to execution. Those can very much be opportunities to highlight your ability to parse through complicated arguments with nuance. And so we'll see your intellectual capabilities or your argumentative abilities. And so these are opportunities. Essays are always opportunities to highlight or demonstrate. And more importantly, I've seen students very successfully write about topics that have to do with politics or touch on culture. So no, that's not my experience. Sometimes I'm struggling with using wide range of vocabulary such as synonyms to make my essay stand out and impressive. Do you have any tips to enhance vocabulary use? Yeah, read a lot. Reading, and anytime you don't understand, because remember, vocabulary is only interesting in context, in the way that it's used. So if you read a bunch, and I even do this, I have a notes document on my phone for when I'm reading, and there's still vocabulary that I don't know. There's hundreds of thousands of words. So when I read and I come across a word that I don't know, I look it up and I write it down. So always read. And when you're reading, look up those words, because it will help you understand how those words are used in context. And a last question, does Spark Prep help with the application? How is the fee? Zoe is the one to answer that question. Yep, absolutely. Spark Prep works with students all over the world on college applications. It is our great joy. We've had quite a bit of success. We do it in, I think, a fun, upbeat, and educational manner. And so we would be delighted to work with you. So you can email Zoe at sparkprep.com, and if she hasn't already, and I think she has her email address in the chat. I want to thank everybody again for joining us today. What a doozy, man. Talking for an hour and 45 minutes is a wild ride. I highly recommend you do it at some point. It's a hoot. Truly is a hoot. For those of you who are celebrating Happy Pride, may you be seen and known as such wonderful human beings and valuable, and you're all cherished and beautiful. And please, everybody, stay safe, stay fed, stay hydrated. Feel free to reach out with us if you have any questions. It was a delight to meet you and see you today, and we'll hope to see you next time.